Welcome to Sparks of Justice. I'm your host, Leslie Mills. This podcast was created to lift up the stories of local activists to inspire you to get involved in your own communities. It can be difficult to keep our hearts open to all the injustices that are impacting society these days. In an increasingly complicated world, we want to connect to the good work that's already being done, because it's only by coming together that we can build a movement. Today's guest is Nico Van Ostrand, who is just finishing up their studies at United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities. And let me just say, you are in for a treat today. Our conversation explored not only Nico's work with youth and young adults, but the deeper questions of how to engage in meaningful and transformative activism with joy. Nico learned how to be Unitarian Universalist by volunteering in religious education classrooms as a teenager, exploring our theology alongside elementary kids. They served as a religious educator for 12 years, including at White Bear Unitarian Universalist Church in Matamirai. Nico's justice work has a focus on BIPOC-centered UU ministry, and they are excited about multi-generational community, storytelling, and the creative ways people around the world are living Unitarian Universalism out loud. Nico works for the UUA as a youth and emerging adult ministry specialist, focused on empowering and journeying with young BIPOC UUs. Nico is deeply grounded in the Filipinx and UU communities of the Twin Cities, regularly co-organizing or participating in community education and activism events. They find spiritual grounding in Tai Chi and early morning walks or weekend hikes with their partner. Nico, it is a pleasure to have you joining us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here.
So why don't we just jump in with our first question, and you can just tell us a little bit, what is your relationship to Unitarian Universalism here in Minnesota?
So I grew up Catholic until about 7th grade, and then my parents shopped around a little bit and found us a UU church to go to. So I started at White Bear UU Church in Matamirai, and I eventually became a religious educator there. I was there for 12 years, which was wonderful, and that was kind of my introduction to what it means to be Unitarian Universalist, was sitting with some 2nd and 3rd graders in a classroom, co-teaching with my dad and with my little sister in the class. And that's how I learned about what it means to go to church as well, and started to find a place for myself. And then, long story short, I went to seminary, and that has been my focus and my path was just, actually, this means a lot to me. This is something that I really care about and that I could see myself being part of for the rest of my life and making a career out of. So I went to seminary, and I'm near the end of that process. And I'm actually in this weird place now of not working for a congregation and not having a spiritual home to go to. So that has been my quest at the moment is, okay, Unitarian Universalism is important to me. I don't have a church to go to, and I don't work at a church right now. So what does that mean? How do I do that? It's a new learning for me, and it's a weird spot to be in at this point in seminary journey. So that's my Minnesota UU story, and I'm currently working for the UUA remotely with the Lifespan Faith Engagement Office. So still doing religious education work, taking it to the national level, and focusing on BIPOC youth and young adults, which is just kind of a dream for me. So in some ways it's all coming together. And again, I miss going to church on Sunday mornings. I'm one of those people who just really, really needs something on Sunday to ground me and to challenge me, help me grow, give me some spiritual touch point in the week. And so that has been something that I've been craving and looking for. But I think is one of the really powerful things about Unitarian Universalism that we have to offer that, maybe these other social justice organizations don't really have, is that spiritual container for some of this stuff.
Absolutely. And we will be touching back on that in just a little bit. As I know, activism and faith go hand in hand, particularly in Unitarian Universalist circles. So we will definitely get to that chance to dig deeper in just a little bit. But why don't we backtrack a little bit first? I'm curious if there was ever a time where you weren't engaged in social justice and you weren't an activist. Like, is there a story about how you came to be involved in issues that are larger than yourself?
Yeah, I think there For most of my childhood, I had this sense of right or wrong and like fairness. And when something wasn't fair, oh, it made me so mad. So like I think that that has been in my bones all growing up. But the point at which I really started to do what is recognizable as social justice is undergrad. When I was in college, I was at Century College, community college, and I thought I wanted to be a math major, and I thought about music, and then started taking a bunch of gender studies classes, and then it became super personal, right? Because I was starting to get all this language and these frameworks for talking about what I was experiencing. It was also when I was exploring my own gender identity and trying to figure out what is non-binary. I didn't have language for that at the time. I was kind of figuring that out in the age of Tumblr. And so there were people who were making up all these fascinating and long and interesting names for different gender expressions and identities. So I was like exploring those and just feeling totally alive in it and also overwhelmed in it. So having that like sort of online, but also pairing with what I was learning in school was when I was really starting to understand, okay, there's power in what I choose to study. This is not just a degree. This is not something that will just allow me to earn a paycheck for the rest of my life. This has the potential to be something transformative. This could be a tool that actually I could use for the rest of my life. So I just started noticing, like, actually, I only have one math class this term and the rest of them are gender studies. So maybe I should consider switching this major thing over. And that's what I did. And so then there was a lot of, campus type activism that I was able to tap into. When I finished up my degree at Hamline University, there was more access to student activism and movements and things. And that's where I really started to like practice it. And I think it's a unique opportunity, that undergrad moment, to be able to test out not only your degree, but also your sort of social justice chops and start to put some of the theory and the things that I was reading about into practice and figuring it out by doing it. And it's just a really special thing to be able to do. So that's kind of where I got started. And yeah, haven't looked back. It has evolved, but that was sort of the launch point. And I had that aha moment of, actually everything I do could be voting for justice. It doesn't have to be just this random bachelor's degree that I get.
Wow. Were there any particular stories or memories within that college experience that kind of like cracked that open for you, or a particular activism pain or something that really like launched you on that path?
Yeah, well, both of them were about the department itself. So at Century, we had this celebration. I think it was like the 50-year anniversary in the Gender Studies program. It's the oldest college level gender studies degree in the state. And so we had this celebration of it that was like, we had people reading about their experience of their gender, and we had a sort of a timeline of the degree. So that was a very joyful thing. And I started to see the ways that social justice movements are grounded in community, and that it's, recognizing where we've come from and who we are now and connecting with other people, all of that. And then at Hamline, there was budget stuff where they were gonna, sunset the women's studies program and a bunch of other things. And so I was like, hey, I just got here. This is my first year. I'm trying to get this degree. You can't then announce you're gonna close down my department. So there were a bunch of us who were in that program, and some of the other ones that were, talking about being closed. We all got together and, had meetings with the administration and organizing meetings that we just sort of, word of mouth said, hey, we're meeting in the basement of, whatever building. Let's all gather there. And we did. And we talked about next steps. And that, again, of just being able to witness the power of a bunch of, we were 18 to 22 years old. Like we're young adults. Many of us were just, living on our own for the first time, and having that first step of independence. And then saying, no, actually, we're going to go up against this whole institution, this entire set of adults who have been doing this for a long time and have degrees and, are a very real and clear different power bracket than we were as students. And to say, no, we don't like this decision for reasons that we feel are really valid. Let's talk about it. Let's change this. Let's not close down this degree that is really impactful in the world. And so they didn't end up sunsetting that, and I don't know where they're at right now. I know there was talk about doing instead like a combination of different departments instead of just closing some of them. But to both be part of the, again, like organizing things and going up against the powers that be, and then also seeing some impact from that, that was powerful to me. To see in real time that protesting works, and that thinking through, okay, this thing that's happening right now doesn't feel right. It's not aligned with my values, and let me take the time to articulate that, and then being able to do so and watch change happen from there. That, again, that's a powerful thing to experience when you're in your sort of formative years, and that's kind of that's what I've been trying to do since then, in just different contexts. But that's definitely where it started.
Wow. So you got to have this experience at a relatively young age, a relatively crucial point in your development as an adult and as a student and as an activist, to go up against, and maybe I even shouldn't say against, but to engage with the very powers that had power over your presence at their institution, and you wanted them to confer a degree on you at some point, and here you are saying you're doing it wrong. What do you think was the crucial part that had them listen to you instead of dismissing you?
Oh, that's such a good question. Two things are coming to mind, and this is speculation because I don't actually know, but I do think power in numbers, just the fact that there were a lot of us working together, and people from outside of the studies program as well who were coming to some of our listening sessions and these conversations. There were a lot of people at the table. A lot. I mean, Hamlin's a pretty small school, and so proportionally a lot, and enough certainly to be making an impact. But to show like this is something that the community is invested in. This is something that matters to a group of people, and even if they're not directly impacted by it, they see the power of what we're trying to do, and so they're with it. And then we also had a couple of really wonderful faculty on our side who were right there with us, who are women's studies professors or in the social justice department or whatever, who again were like, yeah, this is something that's important. And I think having those two things are just sort of it's like proving that stakeholders care about this is kind of sometimes you do have to speak the language of the powerful people in order to get them to listen. And so for that particular issue, it was really effective for us to say community involvement in this, and some faculty are caring about this too, and those things really worked. And again, like there's campus activism happening right now where maybe those things wouldn't quite apply, or they apply very differently, but still like the knowing how to navigate like what is the useful language of activism in this situation. It definitely learned that was effective for that particular one.
Wonderful. That's a beautiful answer, and I might cut this next part if it turns out to be like a weird curveball that doesn't go anywhere. But part of what I'm really curious about stems from my own martial arts background, and learning that the attitude with which we show up to something that could be a conflict changes how receptive our partner is to engaging and moving in the direction we'd like them to move.
Sure.
And I don't need to go like way into like martial arts theory right now. But I'm curious if you perceived anything in your work with the student body and with the faculty and with the administration at Hamlin. Was there anything about the way you chose to show up and the attitude with which you engaged that you think maybe made them receptive to hearing you? And is there a different attitude that might have made them less receptive?
Yeah, that's a question too. Let me think for a second. Because what's coming to mind right now, if I can just externally pass this, is what's coming to mind is that, yes, I think we very effectively showed up in ways that they found palatable. and they found easy to talk to us about. And that doesn't mean there weren't, there was a sort of infamous moment of, yelling and swearing that did happen. And also there was this attitude that, we want Hamlin to be on the right side of history, right? And so part of our message was we care about Hamlin, and we care about this institution because we're trying to get degrees from you guys. We chose to come here. So we're invested in this institution. And so it's not a good look to be closing down your women's studies program and a bunch of languages and foreign studies all at the same time. That's not a good look for this institution. But like, let us help you by urging you to not do that. So that was really, really effective for them to kind of say we're all aligned in this. We're all on the same side of this. Not all movements have that luxury, and not all movements get to go to an institution that is pointed in the same direction as them. And so in that sense, I think that's the thing with Community Pause is like, yeah, totally. The attitude that you enter into social justice does impact the way that you can move through that process. But I believe so strongly that there's a time and a place for anger and rage and property destruction. Like that has a time and place. And so I don't want this to sound at all like I am totally saying social justice movements. Like a yes and, I think, would be my answer to that question.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. So you've gone through multiple degrees now. You've wrapped up your seminary coursework and you're just finishing off a few other things before completing that seminary journey, which is, of course, just a part of the longer ministry journey. So you're at this like beautiful balance point between theory and praxis, book learning and experience. So you have a little of both, but you're kind of straddling a lot of worlds right now. And yet social activism is kind of at the core of what you've been up to for a really long time. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how you personally show up for justice work. Like, what form does it take? Is there a particular issue that you focus on? Like, what draws your attention these days?
Yeah, I think my main movements that I'm sort of tapped into right now are I do some work with young trans teens, and also I'm rooted in the Filipino community here, and so a lot of what we do is like community political education, some history telling, some identity building work, some of the very specific racial justice work that has to happen in Filipino communities, which is going to look different than it does in other communities. So those have been my sort of through lines for most of my life. And I am right now tapped into the movement for Palestinian liberation as well. So these are things that are like, to me, deeply, deeply connected with one another. And how I show up in those movements has changed over time. There was a time when I was, protesting almost every weekend, and 2020, the George Floyd uprising. I think a lot of UUs were out there protesting a lot. And then, like, I got arrested, right? And then my reaction to that was one that prevented me from being able to go out and protest effectively anymore. And so. And it's okay, what are the other ways that can tap into this? Because to me, there are so many ways to be part of the justice movement. It's just finding the ones that are most effective for you in that moment. And so I think protesting is the most public one, the most like out there and in our faces, and it's constantly on our social media and in the news and things. And there are all these other ways that, to me, are without them, social justice movements wouldn't exist. And so I have turned to some of those other ways now. I've been doing things like, using my training from seminary to co-host some UU vigils for Palestine, things like that, where it's like, yeah, I learned how to do a UU worship service in my classes. And that's going to serve me really well. And also when I get a text from somebody saying, hey, we're thinking about hosting this thing, could you like lead a meditation? Yeah, totally. I have the skills to do that. And so that's one of the ways that I can be part of the movement. And, I have teaching background too. And so when there's opportunities to sit with Filipino elders and say, let's talk about what it would mean to defund the police. What would that look like for us? And let me listen to your fears. There's my pastoral care moment for that teaching webinar as well. Like all these things can come together and be really impactful. Sitting with youth who are trans and are having this, like, we'll be talking about like Fall Out Boy and like the music that I grew up with that they're now like coming around to, and we're having these like really fun interactions. And I'm also feeling like a little bit old, but I'm not even 30 yet, and then like all these things are happening. And then next thing you know, the conversation changes and they're talking about their experiences with bullying in school, and then I get to be the person who's a trusted adult to hold that with them and to be there for them and to honor their beauty as a trans person, which maybe isn't a message that they're getting from school. Like those are things that are just, those are really impactful. They are things that lean into the way that I am already showing up in the world and the strengths that I already have, the things I'm already good at, the people I'm already connected to, and just taking it that next step of how can I do this more? How can I move this more towards justice, or take this thing that I'm already doing that's not really connected to justice and make it connected to justice? And in that way, I've just been sort of like slowly but surely aligning my entire life into a justice movement. And that feels so good and right to me. And again, it has changed over time, and I hope will continue to change as the need changes and the justice movements change. But then it makes it easier for me too when someone says, hey, can you do this thing for this movement? I'm more clear about what is aligned with what I'm good at and what I care about and what I'm already working on, and what's maybe not. And I can decide, okay, that's something that, yeah, totally, that might be a little bit of a stretch for me, or I might be giving up my Friday night, and that, maybe I have some personal feelings about that, but yeah, totally, I can do that, and so I will, yes. Or maybe it's like I would have to learn a new skill for that, and I don't have capacity for it right now, and it's not clear to me how that skill would be useful long term. Well, maybe I would say, oh, actually, go ask so-and-so about that, because I think they have that skill set. So being able to avoid burnout to some extent in that way, just being clear about where I'm heading and what I'm good at and the things I care about, the things I can bring to the table, it helps me say yes at the right times, and not spend myself too thin.
Wonderful. I'm intrigued by a couple of things you said, and I'm going to see if I can remember both of them, and just wondering if you could expand a little bit. I'm going to name both of them, and you can decide what order you want to explore them. First, back towards the beginning of your answer in this last part of the conversation, you said that you saw all three strands of your justice work as interconnected and kind of the same thing. So one question is, I would love for you to like expand on those three strands, how they're interconnected and why you see them as the same thing. The other part is more directed towards the listeners. You said that even if you can't protest or be on the front lines, there's lots and lots of ways to engage in activism and to support a movement in so many other ways. And I was wondering if you might expand on what you see some of those other ways being for listeners who maybe don't feel that they can show up on the front lines or don't feel confident being a mouthpiece for whatever issue it is that's on their heart, but they care and they want to help. And what are the ways that they might be able to do that beyond just financial donations? So those are the two questions. You can pick.
Okay. I'll start with the first one, because I think the ways that everything is interconnected relates to how people can then plug into it in so many different ways. So, for me, I think that the three movements that I named were sort of trans youth, spatial justice, and the genocide happening in Gaza right now. And so, there's sort of the theoretical level where everything is kind of, we're not free until everyone is free, and everyone's liberation is kind of in each other's. There's also, I don't know, in like 2 years I'll read books about this, but we're in a very, it feels like a very tense political landscape in the US right now, where trans people are under attack in a really organized way, and the the laws that are being passed that are forcing people to pick up their families and move to states like Minnesota because their trans kids are not safe, their families are not safe, where they're living. That's awful. We are living in a time where it is still dangerous for people to be Black and interacting with police. The police brutality that we're seeing on college campuses is, I mean, it should be making a stomach turn. If it's not, I would invite you to sit with that and challenge yourself with it a little bit and remind yourself that these are really young people who are there because they don't want a genocide to continue. And we're in a moment where we have two political parties that are, how do I say this? We have a Democrat in office who is there while the genocide is happening in Gaza. And I know for many, many young people, that's not acceptable. And that's not something that they're okay with or are going to vote for in Congress. So there's all these things that are like, our political system is doing something. And it's not looking good. It's having these direct impacts on people. And so the ways that I'm tapping in, to me, are deeply connected to that political system that we have in the US. And because of our power on the world stage, it is then connected to these international issues too. And also, it is true that in most of these spaces, it's young people who are leading. It's young people who are saying, this is not the world that I want to come of age in. This is not the world that I am willing to grow old and die in. I need a better world. I deserve a better world. And they're absolutely right. And so it's a question of figuring out how to follow that leadership and how to pay attention to what is being said, or shouted, or, screamed or sung by the young people, and say, okay, either I'm going to listen to them, or I'm going to continue telling them they're wrong about their own experience of this world that they say is okay. That's kind of been the guiding question for me is, what are the people on the margins, or the young people, or, whatever, saying, and is my effort to not follow that actually align with my values? So that's kind of one of the ways that everything's connected together. And the good thing about that, if everything is connected together, that means that everything that you're doing, no matter what, can be something that is working for justice. And I'll give a couple examples, and actually my two parents, because I admire the ways that they have tapped into justice work. My dad's an accountant. Okay, so at first thought you might be like, okay, accountant, numbers, capitalism, how can you put that towards justice? But really for him, he became the treasurer of our congregation. And that was important to him to say, all right, I have this skill set that, right now I'm just using for a job. Churches need treasurers. Churches need help with budgets and pledges and all of those things. And so for him, it was deeply meaningful to be able to offer that skill to the congregation and utilize it in that way. So that was, for him, his way of tapping into a social justice effort through our church. My mom is an acupuncturist, and for her, she wants to make healthcare affordable and accessible to people. And so she has sliding scale. She has a community acupuncture model where she treats multiple people at a time. So you're there with others, which is actually a really important part of being healthy, is to be around other people. For her, it's been really important to figure out, how do I keep the doors open and the lights on of my studio, but also make it so that people can come and get treatment if they need it. And so for her, she's built her entire business model around being able to do acupuncture for people, whether they can pay $100 or just one that day. Those are just a couple of ways where it's like, at first glance, maybe those things are not, social justice careers necessarily, but they can be. They can be. You just have to find the ways to put them in. And I think most things that people do can be oriented towards justice. And it can even be small things. I was just thinking the other day about, I grew up playing piano, and I haven't played in a while because it hurts my wrist to do so now. And I was thinking just about how most of the pieces that I learned were, European white guys from a certain span of time. And those are the famous pieces. So what would it be like to get back into piano and request from my teacher and say, I want to explore compositions from people elsewhere. I want to explore things that are being composed right here in Minnesota, or I want to explore, like what would it be like to then reorient what it means to be a classically trained pianist? And would that have power in the movement? I don't know. It's just something I've been thinking about of, again, what are the ways in which I can take even these, not social justice-y pieces of my life and experiment a little bit. How could I? Maybe this would work, and maybe not. But I do think there's something to the sort of cumulative effect of how we live our lives. And so in that sense, like, no matter who you are, no matter what kind of training you have, there's some kind of way. And the other piece of it that I do want to just lift up is, I said, earlier, there's things I can say yes to because they're aligned with what I care about. And there's things I say no to. And I can say no to those things because I'm trusting that there's someone else out there who has said yes to those things because it's aligned with them. If someone asks me to make a budget, I'm going to say no because that is not in my skill set. But I know that there's people out there who are doing that, who are good at it, who have got that. They've got that part covered because I know that because we're all right independent, right? What I am able to say no to, someone else is able to say yes to, and that's just a real thing that I know to be true. Even if I don't know who it is that's saying yes to that, I know that someone is going to, because that's how we are moving forward together. So,
well, that seems to be like one of the critical elements of shared leadership.
Yes.
If you're trying to lead and you're trying to do everything all by yourself, not only are you going to fail because you can't do everything and you do not have a universal skill set of being good at everything. Nobody does. And so if you go into it with the model of the person in charge has to be doing everything and has to be good at everything, it's going to break down, as the wheels come off the bus. But if you go into it with a model of shared leadership, if you go into it knowing your strengths and your gifts and where your sacred yes is, and you can offer that gladly, that leaves space for other people to find their sacred yes and offer their gifts gladly because they're different than your gifts.
Right. Exactly. And if you're at a place where you're like, okay, that sounds nice and all, but I need it proved to me that other people have got this, then go to your congregation and find their social justice committee or what have you and say, all right, there's a group of 6 to 10 other people. Let me witness that there's other people doing this work in my community, and let me witness that they are also doing the things that I have to say no to. And it's totally valid to need to get that proof before you're able to just kind of trust it to the universe to have it for you. And that's one of the powerful things about being part of a community or a congregation that is doing this work, because then you can have that tangible leaning on each other and counting on each other thing, and not just sort of leave it up to the concept, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it seems like in order to find that next right thing that you can do, like if you're just wanting to just live your life in the relationships you already have, the congregation you're at, the family you're with, the neighbors you have, the job you have, you're not looking to make a huge transition to jump into activist work. It seems like just having some curiosity about what your options are is a really good first step. Like I was hearing you saying, what's just one little nudge in the direction of justice? What's one little like rubbing point that doesn't feel good that you're perceiving that maybe you have the power to question? Just raise some questions, notice it gently, and see if there's anything you can do to move that a little bit towards greater ease for everybody involved. There's just so much opportunity and possibility in just engaging that curiosity around the relationships you already have and the problems that you're already perceiving.
Right. And that's totally like that's Adrienne Ray Brown, Small is All. Like, if you haven't read Emergent Strategy, do so, because a lot of what she talks about is it's about how we're in relationship with the people around us. Like, what your fights look like can be social justice work. Because if we are, we can be living the perfect activist lifestyle, but if we are jerks to our friends, that's not actually helpful. we could also be not doing anything that would be, you know, recognizably activisty, but have beautifully mutual, grounded, loving friendships with people where we are caring about each other and, you know, like sort of living out the values of activism. And that is deeply impactful too. That has these ripple effects. And it's also, I consider myself a Taoist in the UU, and so it's also this Taoist idea that like water can just rub against a rock and erode it away. It doesn't have to be this huge crashing explosion moment. There's a time and a place for just by doing small things and rubbing against that rock for a long time, gently and smoothly, and just because gravity is taking you there, you can still make, you know, a whole Grand Canyon. Those kinds of concepts too are, I think, really important and actually take us away from the charismatic leader model that is sort of how things have been done, which is to say, you know, like Martin Luther King would be an example of a charismatic leader, deeply impactful, incredible human being and person, and he didn't do it alone. He was not the whole civil rights movement. And that's a lot of pressure to put on one person. And I think we have that to some extent in a congregation model that has one minister leader. We put them on a pedestal and kind of say, this is our person. And then if they move on, then the congregation has, you know, maybe an identity crisis of who are we without that minister. And that's not really, you know, we can't all be a charismatic leader, but we can all be friends and we can all be, you know, doing small things in our lives. And I think that to me is like actually the more exciting way to get into activism is, yeah, what do I have HSC over? Takes the pressure off of having to be a really good public speaker or, you know, be in front of people and all of those things. There are ways.
Right. It seems like the crux of it is show up, be in relationship, and do your best to be good to each other.
Yes. Amen. Done.
And then we make it more complicated, but that seems to be at the heart of it.
Right.
So maybe that's a good segue. I'm curious, what is it that lights you up about doing this kind of social justice and advocacy work?
It's totally the relationships. I love reading theory and I love it out of it. Sometimes when I am asked questions about things, I get way too in the sky about it and way too like big picture about it and have to be reminded, okay, so bring that to the here and now, or like bring that into your body or bring that into something tangible that we can work with. But I like to talk about those things. And the driving force for me behind, you know, why I want to show up for stuff is the people that I get it with. Again, the youth that I get to hang out with, I co-facilitate a support group for trans teens, and just like getting to be in a space with them and hear about what they're interested in and worried about and play games with them or like draw pictures with them. That to me is so worth it. And I have had days when I wake up in the morning and I'm like, I want to sleep in today. I don't want to get up and I don't want to go to this support group thing. I don't want to do it. And the reason that I do is because of those teenagers that I'm getting to know and that I'm, you know, building this trust with. That to me is so important. And again, it's not this shiny, flashy, systemic change thing. I'm not giving speeches. I'm just sitting in a room with people, being there for them, getting to know them, caring about them, looking forward to seeing them again next time. And that's all that makes all the difference for them. And again, is the reason that I do it. Same thing with the Filipino community, like getting to know people, and getting to know them beyond just what they do for justice stuff, for when they're showing up for specific, you know, learning experiences, getting to know like what they do in their daily life or the name of their pets or, you know, like these different things that are just like, they're whole humans. And the way that we're going to be able to have a successful movement together is by knowing each other as full humans and recognizing each other and being able to say, you know, hello to each other when we run into each other in other spaces. Like those connections are what makes me excited to do the work, what helps me keep doing the work. Anytime we get that question that's like, if you didn't have to work for a paycheck, what would you do with your time? What I imagine is always like very similar to what I'm already doing, is being with people, making these connections, holding space for each other, sharing food together, making art together, talking, just being humans together, in ways that are moving us towards justice. That to me that's where the magic is. I'm probably not going to be, the guy on the steps of the Capitol or protest doing a speech, but I'm definitely going to be the person sitting there with your trans kids and sharing about how wonderful it is to be trans and how wonderful it is to be together. And yeah, we can totally play some of that music that I loved in 7th grade on Spotify. I would love to do that together with you. So those are things that just, it's joyful. Social justice is joyful, which is not to say it's not hard, but it is, at its core, it is joyful.
So that's a really interesting launching point for the next question, which is, how would your life be impacted if you stopped doing justice work? Stop doing it the way you're doing it now. Whether you stopped altogether, or whether you just significantly changed your approach. How would your life be impacted if you stopped doing it the way you're doing it now?
I don't know that I could stop doing it. I think where Unitarian Universalism shows up in my life is clarity around values, and having practiced, taking the ethical dilemma that's relevant to, me as a 7th grader and saying, what would you do about this? And getting clear about, these are the things I care about. These are my sort of, right now anyways, non-negotiables as far as ethics and values. And when I'm making a decision, these are the things that I will not compromise because they are core values for me. Those have changed over the past. The ways that I've engaged in social movements has changed in the past. And so I know that it will change in the future. I just don't know how. So I hope that I'll be able to respond to the needs of the moment. I don't know that, given what we've been talking about with social justice being this very broadly defined, small pieces of your life, the way that you live, I don't know that it's possible to disengage from social justice in that sense, because there's always a way to plug in. If I imagine just like dropping myself into a situation where Nico is suddenly disengaged from all things social justice, it makes me really sad. I think actually it is harder to deny our interdependence and the reality that we need to be in a movement for justice than it is to be engaged in that. I think it takes an immense amount of effort to pretend that the world is not a messed up place, and to pretend that we can't do anything about it. I think that takes a lot of effort. And actually, I know that because there are all these systems that have been built up to convince us that it is actually really hard to bring about justice in the world. If it wasn't the easiest thing in the world to have justice and have to love a community, then we wouldn't need all these systems and these structures and these weapons and all of these things that have been created by humans to convince us that we can't have the beloved community. So for me, if I were to just suddenly be okay with living a life where I didn't want to just be open to the emergence of beloved community, I don't know. I wouldn't be sad. I wouldn't be disconnected. It wouldn't be a good time. I'm saying this knowing full well that, like, again, engaging in social justice can feel really depressing, and it can feel really slow and hopeless and challenging in ways that like might feel unsafe, even if they're not. And still, to me, that is infinitely more natural and beautiful and wonderful and easy than it is to pretend.
That makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. So at the heart of this work for you is joy and relationship and connection and seeing the beloved community taking root.
Yeah.
We may not see it blossom in the full tree of life in our lifetimes, but this work that we do at its heart is the joy of noticing our interconnectedness and notice the ease with which we can relax into being good to each other.
Mm.
At the same time, there's heartbreak involved in this work, right? There's what's often called the tragic gap, right, between where we are and where we dream of being, and those two are not right next to each other. There's a gap in between that can be really frustrating, really heartbreaking, really overwhelming if that becomes the thing that we focus on. Would you be able to share a story or a time that you really struggled with the heartbreak of all of this work?
Yeah, I mean, frequently, right? Like, frequently. Where my Instagram is feed in this the like heartbreak and horror, and I feel very small, and I feel very one person in my room with my phone, like that. That feeling is always ready to be felt. It's like right there, ready to just remind me. But yes, this heartbreaking work. The story that I'm thinking of actually happened because of a Harmony UU space. And I think for a lot of Unitarian Universalists on the margins, it is a common story to have an experience in a community that we love deeply and care about, where, racism is still a thing. So a racist event happened, and it was really hard. And I, on top of dealing with the racism, had kind of a crisis of faith of, is there actually a spot in Unitarian Universalism for me? Is this actually a faith community that I can belong to? Or is this kind of thing just going to keep happening? And am I going to have to deal with this for the rest of my life as a UU? And actually, probably, because we are steeped in white supremacy culture and our movement is not immune to that. Probably. The reason I'm still here and the reason I went to seminary even after that is because I got connected with some other UUs of color, and I got connected with DRUM, which is Diverse Revolutionary Unitarian Universalist Multicultural Ministries, the oldest organization of UU people of color. And so I got to connect with other people who shared experiences like that and were able to say, yeah, man, that sucks. That's not fair. I wish it wasn't that way. And also to be able to say, I still love Unitarian Universalism. And to get clear that the way I was going to be able to stay in this movement is by having those deep connections with other people who shared those experiences and were experimenting with ways to do Unitarian Universalism that is not rooted in white supremacy culture. And we're trying to figure out, okay, what does like a fully UU worship service look like? Can we actually detach ourselves completely from white supremacy culture? Or what are the unique ways that shows up in a space like that, and how can we address those? So getting connected to people who are already doing that kind of experimentation is how I was able to stay. So of course I've still had, racist or transphobic experiences since then. That part hasn't gone away. Although I do believe we are trying very hard. And we are sort of putting a lot more energy than some communities are into figuring that out. And I need those connections with people to be able to go and just kind of sit and be, get my anger out or process or whatever, have a little ritual maybe, and then be ready to re-engage with it. And that's hard. That's hard work. And I still believe like this is the place for me. My yes to Unitarian Universalism has been so strong that even in those moments of questioning or not being sure or feeling like I'm getting this message that it's not the place for me, they can't touch my yes to Unitarian Universalism. So here I am with it. And again, I'm saying things I've said before already, that it's the relationships with people that's helping me bridge that gap and be okay. I'm just thinking of this right now as I'm talking, but a lot of my Unitarian Universalism stuff has been working with young people. And I think that definitely helps too. It's just, again, witnessing what the young people in our movement are caring about and doing, and pushing the rest of us to also care about. And I'm also aware of this narrative that we can just sort of, put our hope in the next generation. And there's this thing that's like, the youth have got it. I even heard some people say, well, I did my time in justice movement. So I'm handing it over to the young people now. And I don't, yeah, I understand the urge to rest. I really do. And I think there's we can't just expect young people to take care of it from here on. It can't, clear hope in the next generation can't mean that the rest of us as older generations continue doing life as usual, or even continue doing social justice movements as usual, when the young people are saying, this isn't working and it hasn't been working for a long time. And so this is true of social justice movements broadly, but it's also true in Unitarian Universalism specifically. And I think that also opens up a conversation about, I think there's a lot of anxiety about our RE programs kind of bounce back to the numbers they were, pre-pandemic. But they've shifted, they've changed. And so I think my invitation with that is look less at the number of registered kids and look more at the kinds of relationships you have forming among the kids and the families and multiple generations at your congregation, because that, I have noticed, is different now than it was before the pandemic in some really beautiful ways. Maybe there are fewer kids, but maybe they're more deeply connected to your community, and that matters a lot. And there's also this piece of, there are young people who are young adults now who grew up in a UU congregation who are finding more spiritual wholeness in other places, writing social media posts about social justice movements, or making art about social justice movements, or having community dinners with their neighbors or on the encampments. They're finding more spiritual nourishment there than they are in our congregations. And so to me, the call to say, the youth have got it, is also a call to examine what our churches are doing. And instead of saying, how can we get those youth in here? How do we move here, our congregations, to where the youth are and to what they're doing? How do we shift our culture away from one that has been fairly stagnant for a while, and bring it to answer those prophetic voices of the youth who are saying, we need action and we need justice in our lifetimes, and we need things that are responsive to a whole bunch of different identities that, originators of our faith didn't really have in mind when they came up with what a worship service looks like. So how do we make that shift to Unitarian Universalism, bring the church to the people, instead of trying to just bring the people into the church? And how do we do it in a way that doesn't, being behind the beloved 80-year-old white member with a PhD who has been in the congregation for decades? How do we do all of that together? And in there is a multi-generational, multicultural answer, a deeply relational answer, and the one that, again, is the dream of that happening helps me out in those times when things feel hopeless, or when the gap between our aspirations and our reality is so huge. I know it's not just a belief, but I know that will be so good when that happens. That will be so good. And I want to experience it. I want to convince other people that will be so good, that we should all want to experience it so badly that we'll do what it takes to get there. And that's me. And that's just, I want that, And so even when it's hard and feels hopeless, I just want that so bad. I'm not going to let go of it.
So why do you think it's important for people to get involved? What difference will it make to them as an individual if they choose to engage?
Like I've been saying, it's joyful, it's wonderful. You meet really cool people. And then there's this other piece of, if we take the theological route of the inherent worth and dignity in every person, right? Interdependence, all these things that are important to you, denying that doesn't just have an impact on the other person, it has an impact on you. Every time that I deny that another person has inherent worth and dignity, that wounds me in some kind of way. And so if we want to talk about souls, maybe it's a wound to the soul. But I also just think it's a wound to humanity in general. That is a difficult way to go through life. It's a way that has impact on you to be able to go through life pretending that other people are not your relative in some kind of way. That has a negative impact on you. And again, many different ways to talk about that, both religious and not. It is a life and death thing in some kinds of ways. And I'm realizing just now that I'm talking just about the negative parts of it. And I do think that's true. Like, I do think there are negative impacts to not being involved in social justice in some kind of way. The positive things about it are so much more important. They're so much more important. And again, I hope that anyone who's thinking about, I'd like to engage, but I don't know how, follow your joy and think about what are the things that I like doing and that maybe you feel excited, and how could those become justice-y? And I think that would be the way to engage in something like this. And I don't need to try and think about how each individual person listening, what's in it for them about social justice. They can find out for themselves, and they can find out how rewarding it is actually to take something that you already like doing and to do it for justice. It's a really special thing. I feel like I can't be very convincing about it because it is something you just have to experience for yourself. And I hope that a lot of people already know that to be true, and I've already found that to be a real thing.
It sounds like the secret is that the overwhelm comes from not engaging. Holding on to the fear, holding on to the hurt, holding on to the pain of it all. And the secret is that when you engage and you build those relationships in those communities, and the people are the ones drawing you back day after day or week after week, the secret is that there's joy on the other side. And you don't know that until you experience it. It's kind of like trying to convince somebody what the flavor sweet is if they've never tasted it. It's like I could show you diagrams of the tongue and the human brain and the chemical composition of a sugar molecule and show how it has an impact in your bloodstream. Like, I could do all of that, or I could hand you an M&M. And it sounds like in your experience, and the thing you want to lift up is that just showing up and building these relationships and saying yes, the secret is that there's joy in it and that it deepens people's lives in ways that they couldn't imagine before doing the work.
Right.
So you were mentioning a little earlier about how activism and social justice work is kind of at the core of Unitarian Universalism, and particularly these days as we're in the midst of all of our Article 2 bylaws revisions, where we're redefining our core values and how we want to articulate them as a faith community. And we're moving to this place where the central message is becoming that love is at the center of everything else we do. And we have all these other values that may revolve around that, but they're all expressed and articulated through love. With all of that in mind, I would love to hear you say more about how your faith in particular informs your activism.
It's in everything that I do. I don't know at what point it became clear to me that Unitarian Universalism is a way of being in the world more than just what I do on Sunday mornings. I think that's what is really powerful about any religious movement, is when people are able to take those belief systems and those values and let it shape their lives and how they do things. And so for me, something that's powerful in both the principles and the rewrite of Article 2 is an emphasis on justice and how we are connected to each other, and how putting that all in a framework of love, or the inherent the name of each person, it does get back to that idea that this is the way we ought to be. This is a natural way for humans to be in relationship with each other. This is how to live our lives. Every time there's a complicated justice question going on in the world, I can fall back on those values and be able to use them to kind of get clear for me what's going on internally, but also to try and get a picture of what's happening in the justice movement and try to understand, all right, if my UU values say this, I need to then engage in a certain way, or I need to engage in this issue in a way that centers the person most impacted, right? That would mean the justice and equity coming out for me. It's a very internal reflection framework to help me figure out what my next move is. I love a good ritual, and I love a good moment to just be in that space of reset or honoring or just acknowledging that there's something that needs to be. I need to pause and do a ritual and acknowledge it's really complicated right now. Or I need to pause and light a chalice because I'm having an interpersonal conflict with someone else in the movement, and I just need to let my best self be ready to have a conversation with them. These little things that I learned from Unitarian Universalism, I wouldn't have a childless practice if it wasn't for Unitarian Universalism. I love putting a stone on an altar if there's something I need to honor, and giving meaning to that stone when I'm placing it. That's something I picked up in RE classrooms when we did like a feelings check-in and say, this is how I'm feeling today, and place that stone. That for me has been really meaningful and has been one of the tools I've used when, again, it's just like, man, I saw something really disturbing on social media today and I can't get that image out of my head, and I need to set it on this altar so that I can engage in the work some more. What I brought with me from UU worship services are absolutely supporting me in what I'm doing out there. I feel like through this whole conversation, it's been sort of woven with the ways that Unitarian Universalism is, again, just like a way to live. It's a way to be. It's important that the social justice work that happens in a UU space has this spiritual component and has this theological component that we've actually worked really hard to develop. Like, that's what we're in the middle of doing right now, is working really hard to develop the ways that we want to express our shared beliefs. Those exist for a reason. They're not just there to sit in bylaws and get dusty. Those are things that we as a movement have really, really given some efforts to. So why wouldn't I use them out in the world when I'm trying to do justice out there?
So I'm curious if it's gone the other way as well. So that kind of how you've brought your Unitarian Universalism to bear in your activism work. But how has your activism informed your faith? Has your faith changed because of your activism?
Yeah, totally. But can I articulate it? I don't know. I'm in this moment of like, I get to check out UU churches, and I get to like watch online services and, drive to one that's unreasonable distance from my home to check in for a Sunday because I don't have a spiritual home at the moment. But just giving me a peek into some of the diversity of UU worship services. And one of the ways that my outside justice work has kind of come in is it's giving me a clear understanding of what I need from a community. It's not just a religious community, but a community in general, which has been helpful to carry with me as I'm sort of seeing what's going on, and I can see like really beautiful examples of the kind of community that I would love to have, and some things are growing edge or missing the mark or something like that. But I learned what I need from a community specifically from the Filipino community. Things like there has to be good food, and it has to be good food. I said there's a specific, we don't just want to be fed, we want to be fed and happy about it. That is central. There have to be kids running around, and this attitude that kid belongs to everybody. So if they fall and are closer to me than they are to their parent, then I am the one who is there to comfort them and get them back on their feet so they can continue running around and laughing and having a good time. It's an attitude that the space is ours all to care for. There are elders in the space who are like talking to me about their experiences, and maybe they're complaining about something that I did, but they're doing it in a way that I can tell they care about me, and they're communicating that to me because they want me to be able to be part of this community in a way that works well for them. And I'm able to say, yeah, no, I won't be changing that behavior, and here's why, and I love you, and we're going to keep being in community together. These are things that, like I said, I do find in UU spaces because I want UU if I didn't find them. But I don't find them all the time, and I don't always find all of them at the same time in the same space. And so are things that I strive to then bring into the spaces, and that's the way that I strive to show up, because even just one person sometimes doing community slightly differently, other people start to get excited about it too, and then next thing you know, you have a whole shift going on. So that for me has been one clear way. And then also, I don't have as much patience for book clubs anymore. And I say that's all from a place of deep love for Unitarian Universalists and for the book clubby type groups that I have been a part of. I think you have a tendency to get stuck in them. There is a way to learn things from books and learn things from discussions that feeds directly into action in some kind of way. And that is something that I learned from other justice spaces. So you need to know what movement you're building on and the history you're coming from, and it's sort of some theory of what you're working with here. Like, that's all important stuff, and it's useless if you just sit on it. So many of the community education spaces were things that it was like, here's a history presentation, we have a PowerPoint, we're going to talk to you for a while, and then we're going to go into this intentional community building space, so you can get connected with other people in the community and learn about what they're doing and then do the stuff, whatever that might be. So that's another thing that I bring with me into Unitarian Universalism, is the small group ministry opportunities that are exciting to me, that I care about, that I wanted to be part of when I was a religious educator, were the ones that had that balance. So let's spend some time learning about it, and then let's leave with some clear steps and some diverse ideas about what it means to then do this learning in the world. That part, I think, I'm not the only person who is shifting in that direction. And it's really exciting to me to get towards that piece. I think we have a lot of knowledge in Unitarian Universalist spaces. We have a lot of really, really smart people in many senses of that word. So anything we can do to sort of give containers to apply that, I think, is a really cool thing.
I'm also curious, since you're mentioning community and how central that is to your justice work. Of course, being a podcast for Moose Jaw, we're focusing on Unitarian Universalist communities. Mm-hmm. But you have mentioned a couple times your Filipino community and how central that is to your identity and your justice work as well. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to talk a little bit about doing justice work in that community and in that culture, and how that might be the same or different from doing it in UU circles.
I think the biggest difference is Catholicism is just really huge in the Philippines. So most people are Catholic. I don't know what the exact percentage is, but it's in the high 90s. There's a lot of even just cultural Catholicism. Even if people aren't going to church, it's present in most conversations. So I don't evangelize Unitarian Universalism in Filipino spaces, because that's not really the time and the place. But I can sit with people and reference books that I read in seminary and say, hey, you might actually be interested in South American liberation theology, because that's an intersection of social justice movements and Catholicism. That's a useful way that I can kind of bring sort of the pluralist background of Unitarian Universalism in there. But mostly for the people who aren't Catholic, they're sort of the spiritual but not religious types, or adverse to religion, and it doesn't play a role in their life. Maybe they hadn't had experience with it. And so it doesn't show up in these explicit ways in organizing there. And again, I can't be in a space and not be UU. And so just by me being there gives Unitarian Universalism in the ways that we're organizing and being together. And I definitely brought in some check-in practices, or I brought in a few meditations that I've done at church. I brought those into justice spaces where I needed to process something. And so let's start with a little meditation moment. So I do bring these things in, but again, the cultural center or the religious center of many Filipinos is very different from Unitarian Universalism. And I'm not in the Catholic Filipino organizations. And so I would imagine that what religious organizing looks like for them would be a very specific flavor of Catholicism, very specific flavor of Filipino justice work. But my circles tend to be more secular. I will also mention that there are churches in the Philippines. And so we have company and kin over there who are Filipino in that very Catholic context, who are Unitarian Universalists. And I've just been able to start getting connected with them in really meaningful ways. I got to visit in 2019, and now there's a group of us that meet once a month online, and so far have been sharing stories and getting to know each other. And it's beautiful and wonderful. And the ways that Unitarian Universalism shows up in the Philippines is different from how it shows up in the U.S. People have to learn from them. And if anyone ever has an opportunity to go to a pilgrimage in the Philippines, I would say, yeah, really do that. For me, it was life-changing, both in my Unitarian Universalism and in how I am organizing with the Filipino community here. There's just something about getting to be on the islands and getting to be in a UU church in the islands. I can't describe it. That's not something you can read about and learn about. It's something you have to do.
I was able to go on my own pilgrimage to the Philippines in 2010, and it was through United, and it was led by a Filipino professor, Eleazar Fernandez. And so he was leading a group over there, and it was not UU specific, it was UCC specific. There were several UUs on the trip, and it was a transformative experience nonetheless, and I can only imagine how much more transformative it would have been had we been able to engage with Unitarian Universalists and start building those bridges that were maybe a little bit more relevant to our context. So I think that you already touched on most of the other questions that I had. So I'll just ask, what else is there that you still would like to share?
Just that social justice should be joyful, and even if there are lonely moments, it should be in the context of community and connection with people that love you, and care about how you're doing, and it should feel good. I feel so strongly about that. The caveat that for some of us, there's adding levels of deep discomfort and shame and fear and like a real material sacrifice. Like all of those things are real. In that moment, it might not feel good. But the arc of social justice, or you personally, ought to be a positive and joyful and good one, where it's clear that there's a reason for those feelings of discomfort or those sacrifices, that it's clear to you that if you didn't do that, if you didn't go through that discomfort, that not only would the justice movement be worse off, but you yourself personally would also be worse off, emotionally, ethically, all of those things. And it should feel good to know that you're in that moment and you're doing those things and you're making those choices that are moving towards justice. That should just feel good. I think this should be joyful, this should be positive, and when it's hard, it should still be held in this container of rightness. And I think that's one of the things that congregations do really well, is giving that container for rightness and the space to say, this is so right, and also right now it feels really wrong, it hurts, I don't like this, I'm struggling, and to be able to hold both of those things, the community effort.
And discerning sometimes the discomfort is growth.
Yes.
Growing and healing are not comfortable processes. There's growing pains, there's healing pains. The point is what's on the other side of that discomfort, and learning to discern what is the discomfort of growing and healing and what is the discomfort of an injustice or a broken relationship, and figuring out where you want to be in the balance of those two things to the other side of it.
Right. Because they're often not equal. Even if it feels like the worst pain that you personally have experienced in your whole life, I think one of the powerful things about being in a community of social justice movements can show this context for that pain and can help you understand where that fits in the community. It's valid. Any pain you're feeling is valid. It might not outweigh some of the other injustices that are going on. And so being able to hold my space to hold and process and feel and care for and heal the pain that I'm feeling, and to do it in a way that is not distracting from or taking away from or trying to invalidate the pain and power of repression. You need your people for that. Find them. Or if you have them, tell them that you know them today.
Well, thank you for being one of our people, Nico. Our movement is stronger for having you in it.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast. It was just such a joy talking with you. The time just flew by. So
yeah, no kidding.
Thank you for agreeing to be part of this experiment and come on the show today. It was really a pleasure.
So glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for listening to Sparks of Justice. This podcast is produced by the Minnesota Unitarian Universalist Social Justice Alliance, or MooseJaw, a nonprofit organization dedicated to connecting Unitarian Universalists to create a more just and loving world. Our first season of this podcast is made possible by a generous grant from First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis. We are so grateful for their ongoing support of MooseJaw's mission. In addition to grants, MooseJaw is almost entirely funded by individual contributions from generous supporters like you. Your donations are tax-deductible and go directly towards staff and programs. It's easy to donate or become a sustaining donor. Please visit our website at www.moosejaw.org. Thank you for helping us build a more just, loving, and connected community in Minnesota and beyond. And remember to like, follow, and share to help us spread the word.